All right. Welcome, everybody, to this remote interview. My name is Lisette, and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And on the line today, all the way from hot Las Vegas, Nevada, in the United States, I have Wayne Turmel. Wayne, you are, among many things, the author of Long Distance Leader, which the second edition is coming out very shortly, depending on when you're listening to this podcast. The second edition is coming out. We're going to talk about that. But in this series, we're exploring the head of remote. And with this second edition of Long Distance Leader, it's the perfect time to really dive into this position and with some of the changes that have come about. So let's start from the beginning. What, in your opinion, is a head of remote?
Well, head of remote, for lack of a better term, should be air traffic control. You think about,
Ooh,
there are planes flying and landing and taking off, and somebody needs to be there to make sure they don't smack into each other. And it's a fairly ugly metaphor, but it kind of works because head of remote is an intersection where the need to get the work done and how we get the work done, and then the IT infrastructure and the HR policies and procedures and things like recruiting the right people all intersect. And all of those roles have existed before, but they've existed under the assumption that, the CEO kind of has these people that answers to them, and it works, right? It makes everything happen. But now we've added this. Most people think it's just distance that has changed, right? The work is the same, but some people are somewhere else. That's manageable. We're at a point now where it's not just distance, but also time.
ooh,
And
right,
that impacts how people work. It impacts things like, stupid things that people don't think about. HR policies. Does everybody need to be at work at the same time, no matter where they are in the world? Right? Which means people in Bangalore are up all night, and people like me on the west coast of the US, my day starts at 6:30 or 7 in the morning because the rest of the country is working on New York time.
right.
Is that the best way to work, right? There are organizations that track when you log on in the morning and when you leave because they want to make sure you get those 8 hours in there, right?
Right.
There are other organizations that say, hey, get your work done. We don't care. If you want to do it at midnight, if you want to go to the supermarket in the middle of the day, knock yourself out, just get your work done. But those have to be policies that are integrated into the way the company works and the culture and everything else. And it won't work unless you have the IT infrastructure, and the IT infrastructure won't work unless you can get their work done. Think about how many, you work for outside clients as I do, Lisette. So how many times have you seen organizations that can't use certain tools because the security is set so high that it doesn't work outside the firewall,
Right.
right? Well, yeah, great, your network is secure, but the work isn't getting done because the people in charge of the work and the people in charge of the security didn't have that conversation.
Right.
Or there isn't anybody with sufficient horsepower to negotiate that conversation.
So then where does this role sit? It sounds like it's really broad, right? There's part infrastructure, part HR, part operations. Is it like its own thing that overlaps with everything?
I think it is a dotted line to everyone but the ultimate boss.
Oh,
I think it is if it's not granted a C title because of whatever politics or pay structure or whatever you're putting together, I think they answer to the C level.
right,
I think they have to, because you have to have a dotted line strong enough to have some teeth.
right. Right. You have to have some sort of, I mean, for lack of a better word, power to make the changes that need to be made.
Yeah, and ultimately it needs to be soft power because it's all negotiation and relationships and that kind of thing, right? Coming in guns blazing is a sure way to create havoc. The person needs to be a high level diplomat, uh,
Ooh, I
for lack
like
of a
that.
better term.
I've heard that before, that there is a lot of negotiation happening in this role.
Sure. I mean, there is a legitimate discussion that needs to be had between network security and allowing people to work wherever they want.
Right.
Right? If the answer is a VPN, you are going to give up some degree of bandwidth performance. You are going to give up the ability to do absolutely everything everywhere. Is that a trade-off that makes sense? In some cases, it is. In some cases, we need to think about this.
Right. Right. So it's not necessarily that somebody has to have the expertise in IT or the expertise in HR, but it needs to be somebody that knows who to go to find that expertise and to sort of wrangle the conversations, make sure that those conversations are happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And, at the moment, there are no business schools offering MBAs in head of remote,
Right.
right? I don't think we're there yet. Um, and so, every organization is going to determine how important this is to them, right? How much of their workforce is going to be remote. If you are Great Cuts, the barbershop chain here in the US, there is a limited amount of remote work that happens because the work gets done in a chair in a strip mall on
Right.
somebody's head,
Right. For your hair
right?
physically must be cut. Lots of
So you've
jobs.
got your
Yeah.
regional structure, you've got administration. That's where the remote stuff comes in, as opposed to I am a software company and you can literally write code anywhere as long as it gets done.
Right.
In which case, every human on the team is going to be remote, and that's a different structure. It's a different culture. It's a different infrastructure. It's all of that stuff. So I think ideally, to my mind, ideally a head of remote would bubble up from inside the organization.
Right.
In a perfect world, because they've got the institutional memory and the kind of knowledge of how things really get done. I mean, culture is how we do things here.
Right. Right. So you have
And every
the
company has a
internal
different here.
expertise.
Every company has a
Yeah.
different here and a different things that they need to do. And if you know that and you're part of it, it's a lot easier, assuming you are objectively looking at the situation, because it's easy to get mired in the culture and then you're not really looking at the best possible solutions. But if somebody knows the culture and kind of knows how we really work, it's a little bit easier to put together things that are going to function and achieve the end results.
Right. Right. Because it comes down to the politics. I really liked your high level diplomat metaphor. It was like, yeah, yeah, that is kind of how it is. You are a
You know,
diplomat.
politics deservedly um, has a nasty connotation to it. But if you go back to what it really means, politics is how people interact
And organize themselves.
and organize themselves. And you can't avoid it. I mean, there are ugly sides to politics. And, I used to refer to one place I worked as Game of Cubicles, uh, because it was pretty cutthroat and nasty and whatever. And people, oh, I mean, remote workers. Oh, I love being remote because I don't have to get involved with the politics. And then they don't know who's doing what. They don't know what's going on in the company. They're constantly blindsided by things that occur because they don't know what's going on.
Right.
Uh, a head of remote needs to be a high level diplomat, without being Machiavellian.
Right. Right.
And those kinds of people are sadly rare.
You need a
So what you need to
benevolent
do
high
is,
level diplomat.
yeah, unless you find that high level diplomat, you really need to create some guardrails around that role.
Right. Right. It sounds like empathy is an important personality trait, or benevolence would be a good important personality trait. Like you want to be a servant leader in that
Yeah,
sense.
I think that's true. And it's funny, you said empathy, and I went, yes. And you went benevolence, and I went,
All right, maybe empathy is
because
better. Yeah.
I think empathy is better. You need to be able to listen and understand where people are coming from. If you attempt to be benevolent at all times, a lot of good decisions don't get made.
I see what you mean.
Sometimes there are two kinds of decisions. And if you work in an engineering culture, it skews to there is a right answer. There is an absolute correct optimum answer for this problem. And if you skew on the other side, there's let's find an answer that everybody can live with.
Right.
And they both have their advantages and they both have their disadvantages as places to work. I think the head of remote needs to be able to find that middle ground. And if it's not the absolute optimum mathematically correct answer, why not? Right? What are the trade-offs? And if it's somebody is really not going to like this answer, how do we explain it, implement it in a way that doesn't get blood on the floor?
Right. If you're a new head of remote or a new leader coming into a virtual organization, let's go to sort of tie in your book to all of this, where do you start?
See, I am going to say something which sounds completely counterintuitive, which is I would get my butt on a plane. And if you have offices, let's see them. If you have people in central locations, let's check that out so that you get context for what's going on with people. If that is not possible for budget, logistic, whatever reason, and it's really not possible, the next move is the kind of conversations that we're having, but really having those conversations. Let me give you a really simple example of something. We just hired somebody new at the Kevin Eikenberry Group, and his first job, week one, because he's remote, week one, his first job was contact every single member of our 13-person team and schedule a half-hour one-on-one video conversation. And it's only partly about work. I mean, you're new on the job. Once you get past well, what do you do? How does this work? Do I send you my
Right.
timesheets? There's time for who are you and where'd you go to school? And, what do you like about the job? And what don't you like about the job? And even just on an individual contributor level, that jump starts the process of understanding what's going on in very real ways. And you have to take the time and you have to do it as richly as possible. Ideally, that's you and I over a cup of coffee. If we can't do that, then this needs to
Right.
be done. And it needs to be done very, very diligently and mindfully. You're not just saying, hi, how are you? Where are you from? Oh, look at that thing behind you on the wall. But as head of remote, what do you actually do? What does your day look like? What does your team look like? What is working for you that you absolutely cannot give up? What is not working that you're banging your head against the wall and nobody seems to be listening? you need to have those conversations as soon as possible and really, really listen with empathy and openness and a lack of judgment at that point. That is not easy for human beings to always exhibit.
Right. Just taking in the information, right? Or what I like, I had a friend who always used to say, I judge and accept at the same time. I like that. It was like, oh yeah, I can see that. That's a good that's a good way to put it. Like you judge someone and accept how they are at the very same time.
Yes.
I want to get a little bit into metrics. One of the things, in terms of like leadership is we want to measure success. How do you like where do you start with measuring success as a leader? What does that look like beyond the obvious profit, sort
Well,
of,
what are you responsible for? Right? If profit margin is a metric, right? We need X% of sales to be profitable. What does HR care about that? Well, they should care because every time they lose somebody, every time they hire the wrong person, there is a cost that goes against the profit margin. So does every part of the organization understand its role in those metrics? And everybody needs to know everybody else's metrics. IT needs to be aware that if I've got 10% turnover every year, and one of the reasons is frustration with trying to get on the VPN and not being able to access information in a timely manner, IT plays a role in that.
right?
And they say, well,
How
just either hire people with broadband or don't hire people from third world countries. Well,
right,
that makes sense unless we're trying to expand into a third world country. And
right, right,
right. So we all have in whatever company, wherever we're located, right? There are already metrics that exist. When you're looking at this role, are those metrics still valid in this new world? And a lot of people haven't really examined. I mean, post COVID, a lot of people immediately went back to the metrics that they had before in the
right,
before times, as if that whole 2 years of our lives never happened. Which is, hope is not a strategy.
right,
Uh, and so, look at those metrics and say, where do they cross? Right? Where does retention match with our desire to expand geographically? Right? If you've returned to the office, and even if you have a hybrid situation where uh, everybody has to come into the office 2 days a week, you have basically said we need to hire people within a 20-mile radius of our office.
right,
So, yes, we want the absolute best people. We want the most talented people, but we need the most talented people that live within 20 miles of our office. If the most talented person for this job lives in Denver and we're not willing to accommodate or adjust for that remote component, we're not really going after the best people.
right,
And that's a perfectly valid decision, right? It's one of those, what's the decision we need to make? Do we make the best quantitative decision or compromise in a way that allows us to be successful and involves a trade-off?
right. And I think it's really important that clarity of where are you at as a company, regardless of what it is that clarity on where you're at, because you have to build the processes from there. Because saying you're one thing and doing another is just demoralizing for most people. So I would think being clear about your culture is important.
Well, it's critical, and um, I'm as a consultant, you fall into rhythms of saying certain things, but certain messages need to be heard at certain times. And one thing that I am totally convinced of is that what most people are calling hybrid work is not hybrid work, it's a hostage negotiation.
Oh, all right. All right. Explain, explain.
How
I
much can
mean,
we
I
make them come
relate.
back into the office before they start to quit? How
Yeah,
much can I work from home and avoid going to the office until they fire me?
right.
And we come up with well, you have to come in a couple days a week. All right, I can live with that. That's not hybrid. That's a blend and it's a compromise. And like all compromises, there are probably things that aren't being maximized. Real hybrid work, if you think about what a hybrid is, think about a mule. If you've ever dealt with mules, you know that yes, they are part horse and part donkey, but they are their own unique thing. There are traits unique to mules that do not exist in the other two. And if you maximize those things, mules are fabulous animals for doing certain kinds of work. And if you
Right.
ignore them, you're in a lot of trouble.
Right.
A mule is a true hybrid. It takes two things and creates a third brand new entity. Hybrid work, to be really effective, is not just a negotiation of who works where. It involves time. When does the work get done?
You did mention that it's the distance and the
You know,
time.
yeah, time plays an important factor. Does work need to be done synchronously? So, for example, if you've got everybody coming into the office 2 days a week, you get people, well, I can't get any work done because I'm in the office. Well, what kind of work are you trying to get done? If you're
Right.
trying to get heads down, task complete, we all know you get more stuff done when you're at home by yourself. You can bang through your task list very simply. There is work that needs to be done that is done best when we are in person. The communication, some of the meetings, the brainstorming, the relationship building. So if I've got to go into the office every Tuesday and Wednesday, and I'm trying to get my checklists done on Tuesday and Wednesday, that's not the optimal use of that time because I'm still going to get stuck on Zoom meetings on Friday.
Right.
Are we doing the collaborative work when we're together and can maximize that collaborative work so that we're left alone to get the stuff off our
Right.
task lists
Right.
more effectively?
It's like when I traveled a lot, I had a different list for when I was on the plane or a train, or, like there's stuff you can do while standing in line, like things I could just read while, so you sort of break up the
Yeah.
tasks based on the location. Yeah.
But we don't do that. It's like, no, it's Tuesday. I must be in the office. But oh, by the way, the TPS reports still need to be done.
Right. Right.
So are we examining not only what work gets done where, but when that work is best done? And so it creates this new thing where, we have fewer Zoom meetings because we maximize our time together. Or we focus on collaboration certain days of the week because it's really important that we work synchronously to finish certain projects, but the rest of the time, let people's body clock run where they what they're
Right.
doing.
Where do you go when you need advice or help on something? What are the resources that you turn to?
That's a pretty that's a pretty broad question. Um, Resources, who do I turn to? I have people, I mean, look at me. I've been on this planet a pretty long time and a pretty extensive network. So certainly, I turn to Kevin, who's my co-author, my boss, my colleague, my friend. I turn to Kevin for things. I turn to people outside the organization for a fresh perspective. Am I thinking about this the right way, or what are you guys doing? I am lucky in that although I am an introvert and a curmudgeon, I also have a really good network of smart people.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. And I think one of the things that a head of remote, look at me bringing it back. I think one of the things that a head of remote must do is have their antenna out in the world and network with their colleagues in other organizations and understand. And it's going to involve, probably going to some conferences that the boss doesn't want to pay for and things like that. But I think the head of remote has to have amazing peripheral vision.
Yeah.
They need to be able to see both inside and outside the organization to find the best practices, to see potential roadblocks, to kind of see what's coming next. So, if you only go inside your own organization for answers, inbreeding has never been a good thing.
Right. Right. You want more innovation,
To get back
fresh
to the mule.
ideas. Right.
Well, you need fresh ideas, and it's a defense mechanism, right? If I work if I'm in the military and I work inside a fort and everything is pointing inside, I'm not going to see what's coming.
Right.
And the head of remote needs to be proactive. They need to be able to send up a flare and say, hey, this is a potential problem. We need to, Fortune 500 companies are starting to find that when they limit remote work, they're having a harder time recruiting in certain areas. What are we going to do about that? Is a discussion that should happen before HR comes and says, I know this position has been empty for 2 months. We can't find any qualified applicants.
Right. Given these parameters. So let's make it more realistic. Yeah. Indeed. And I think that there's
are
a
the
lot
parameters
of
right?
Exactly. And there's so many groups that are served
right?
by remote.
Yeah. And are we looking in the right places? Are our policies constraining our ability to find the right people? Do we need to re-examine pay? Do we need to? There's a lot going on. And again, these are all negotiations. These aren't things that the head of remote says, well, we're going to pay more if people are in the Pacific time zone.
Right.
That's not your decision to make. And the impact is so seismic that it can't be one person's decision.
Right. That's why I like that it seems like this role really does spread itself out throughout the organization, right? It sits in that leadership loop at the top, sort of advising and working with and being the diplomat, the high-level diplomat, helping the rest of the organization.
To get back to Game of Thrones, it's the hand of the king.
Right.
Is what it is.
I like that. In fact, in one last interview, just not that long ago, somebody described it as the right hand. It's like the right hand of the leader in some ways, because you're just taking this new you're introducing this brand new medium that now needs to be taken very seriously, as we're all seeing. Love it. Wade, I've taken copious notes and I'm really looking forward to integrating these into the book. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, Lisette. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And, these are conversations I like to have.
Yeah, they're totally interesting, and they're on the cusp of something new, which I think is very exciting. I like the exploration of these new things that are coming up. So thank you so much. And to everybody else, be powerful.